Good day. So, in the last class, I have been discussing about Romantic Age. I have also talked about the pre-Romantic Age, which actually leads to this Romantic Age, and also about the French Revolution and the American Revolution, because those were the prominent events, the historical events that actually led to Romanticism and the rise of nationalism. So, apart from these, I have also talked about the literature, how a drastic change occurred during the Romantic Age. Now, in this session, I will be talking about the Victorian Age. As you know, that Victorian Age is named after the reign of Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria became queen in 1837, and she died in 1901. So, this particular time span is considered to be the Victorian Age. Now, in Victorian Age, I have also told in my last classes that Victorian age follows a very strict moral code of conducts. Okay. But at the same time, you will find some dialectics in this age, some positive and negative aspect of everything. On the one side, there are hard and fast rule, very strict moral code of conducts that the citizens have to follow. On the other hand, there was this rise of prostitution as well as child labor. So the duality that you will see throughout the Victorian age, even in the field of spirituality and science, you will find a clash between religion and science. So this duality is always there during the Victorian age. Now, let me go to the next slide. So Queen Victoria ruled from 1837 to 1901 and became one of the most famous rulers in English history. Great Britain reached the height of its power during this period because this was the time when this Britain almost occupied many of the colonies. India was one of them, but apart from India, it was Africa, then Canada, and other very prominent colonies that were there under um, the rule of Britain. So Great Britain reached the height of its power during this period. It built a great colonial empire, and the British proudly claimed that the sun never set up in Britain. This was a very famous line. It was an eventful period with changes taking place in every sphere of life. In several ways, it was the harbinger of the 20th century. Due to a number of inventions, life in England was becoming modern and comfortable. Victoria's long reign saw many changes in the attitudes of the people. The initial years of her reign passed in a series of reforms that touched various spheres of life. About these reform bills and all, I will be talking in the next slide. The people expected a great deal from all these reforms, but they were disappointed. The first part of Queen Victoria's reign was therefore filled with the discontent and bitterness. Now, let us see what are the social unrest that she followed. I mean, during her initial career as a queen, there was this social unrest going on, which was there since last quarter of the Romantic Age. So the middle classes were resentful of the privilege enjoyed by the aristocracy. And if you remember, during the Romantic Age, what happened? People, the middle class and the lower class, they were protesting. They were becoming a kind of rebellion. Okay, rebel against the privileged aristocrat class. This actually leads to the French Revolution. So they agitated against the corn laws, which were seen as a tax on the whole community for the enrichment of the landowners. A campaign was organized to repeal the corn law, and finally they succeeded in 1846. Okay, corn law was made in which there was this high amount of tax that the middle and lower class people need to pay to the landowners. So this law has been finally taken back. The lower classes were disappointed with the Reform Bill of 1832, so there were three Reform Bill that took place in 1832, 1867, then 1884. So the classes were disappointed with the Reform Bill of 1832 as this were totally ignored. The discontent of the poor expressed itself through Chartism, which was a passionate protest against the harsh condition in which they had to live and work. Chartism, again, a very important event about which I will be talking in the next slide. So the working class demanded franchise and a radical reform of the parliament. After the disturbance caused by Chartism and the Anti-Corn Law League, there was a pause for a period of almost 20 years. Okay, so almost for the next 20 years, the era was very peaceful with lots of diversity as well as progress in Britain. The 1817 Education Act is still another significant piece of mid Victorian legislation oriented towards reform. The very poor had some access to education before 1870, principally through ragged schools, but the Foster Education Act provided for a national system of elementary education, at least for England and Wales. So there was this, progress in education system also development and progress that led to a quality education in England by 1890s. So the reform measures, especially in respect of granting voting rights to the people, were initiated within the 19th century when three reforms bills were passed in 1832, 1867, and 1884. So before that, what happened is that only the privileged class were allowed to vote. But with this reformation and all, now the male members were able to vote from all the classes. Later on, by 1920s, the women will also come to the forefront, and the women suffrage actually led them the rights of vote. The 1832 Reform Act was one of the landmark in the history of electoral rights. Okay, again a suffrage. Chartism. Chartism, the name given to groups who supported the petition known as People's Charter, emerged concomitantly with the activism surrounding the movement for a repeal of corn laws and was propelled by anger over the realities of the workhouses created by the new poor law. So many laws were made, but still the people were working day and night in the factories. Child labor was at its peak. So people started to file a petition like nowadays, what we do to protest against a decision of the government, we file petitions. In the same way, they have signed petition, not in an online mode, but in a kind of offline mode. So designed to readdress the social, political, and economic injustice of the working classes, the People's Charter had six primary goals. Remember these six primary goals because you never know this question can come in UGC NET also. So, annual parliaments, universal suffrage for men, the abolition of the property qualification for members of the House of Commons, a secret ballot, equal electoral districts, and salaries for members of parliament. These were the six primary goals of the Charter Act. Okay, People's Charter. Despite some 1 lakh, it's 12 lakh 80,000 signatures, it was rejected by the House of Commons in 1839. So this People's Charter was rejected. But then 2 million more signatures appeared on a petition presented 3 years later. Another charter was rejected in 1848. So though this charter, People's Charter was rejected, but it has a great influence upon the government. They came to know that people are becoming more and more aware. They are protesting, and if 2 million people can sign, that's a huge list. So they were scared of that. So they started to make reformation in their laws. Additional legislative measures taken by Parliament in 1855 and 1862 helped to improve the plight of the working classes and to alleviate tensions that had peaked during the Chartist era. The need to improve sanitary conditions, especially in the cities, was another focus of reform initiatives. Four major epidemics of cholera, which took place in 1831, 48, 53, and 66, hit working class communities especially hard, primarily because of the inadequate measures to ensure a safe supply of water. So, you will see that there was this development and progress in health systems were also going on during this Victorian age. A report on the sanitary condition of the laboring population published in 1842 by Edwin Chadwick led to the Public Health Act of 1848. So this was very commendable effort that happened during the Victorian age. Public Health Act, which created a central board of health with the power to supervise the street cleaning and waste removal and responsibility for the water supply. Now, one of the movement which was famous during this, from literary point of view, it was very famous during the Victorian Age was Oxford movement. Although high church tendencies had diminished during the long 18th century, they resurfaced in England in the 1830s in Oxford, primarily because of the upset caused by the admission of non-Anglican to Parliament and by other perceived threats to church authority. Leaders of the Oxford movement, John Cable, John Newman, Richard Froude, galvanized opposition within the church to evangelicalism. Especially influential were tracts for the times written by Newman. Tracts for the time, very important. Tracts written by Newman. Question can come in UGC name. So, especially influential were tracts for the times written by Newman and others between 1833 and 1844, which argued that the Church of England rightfully occupied the middle way between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. The igniting factor was the proposal of Whig government to suppress half of the Anglican bishops and to redispose their incomes without first consulting the church. The beginning of the movement was from July 1833. Other speakers associated with it were Richard Hurrell Froude, Frederick Faber, Isaac Williams, Charlotte Marriott, Bernard Dalgairns, William Ward, Edward Beauvoir-Trussy. So these were the important figures associated with Oxford movement. Then comes the mid-Victorian phase, which was very problematic. The duality actually starts from here. So the year between 1846 and 1868 constitute what is generally known as the mid-Victorian era. This was the most prosperous part of the century, and the British slipped into a complacent mood. Britain was considered to be the most industrially advanced country in the world and earned the title the workshop of the world. Agriculturally, England continued to do well in spite of the repealing the corn laws. The nobility and gentry continued to hold the reins of the government. The lot of working class also was not very bad. They received higher wages and enjoyed better food. Due to the overall improvement of the economy, there was a lessening of class tension. This in turn led to a sense of well being and satisfaction. It was an optimistic period, and the people looked forward to the great opportunities that lay before them. Now, progress was the catchword of the age during this mid Victorian period, but at the same time, this progress led to the clash, which was which was on the ground of culture as well as religion and also the profession. So Tennyson's poem Ulysses captures the mood of the people accurately. Okay, this mood of progress. Yet all experiences is an art where through gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever. Okay, so he's talking about the exploration and progress via these lines in Ulysses. Now, science and technological advancement were also going on. With the founding of the British Association for Advancement of Science in 1831, it comes as little surprise that science was at the forefront of much public discussion and activity during Victorian's reign. Both amateurs and professionals were engaged in scientific discovery, and the relationship between the two was continually a matter of debate. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection deserves its status as a landmark in the history of science, but many of its ideas were in circulation before its publication in 1859. Now, the Great Exhibition was one of a kind of showcase, okay, show off by this British government. They were exhibiting their power through this great exhibition. Sometimes heralded as the first World War fair, the great exhibition of the works of industry of all nations epitomized Britain's pride in its industrial supremacy at mid-century. It was organized by Prince Albert and Henry Cole, both members of the Society of Arts, and lasted for 5 months. The icon most often associated with the Great Exhibition was the spectacular Crystal Palace, an enormous greenhouse-like structure designed by Joseph Paxton. Made of glass and metal and located in Hyde Park, the Crystal Palace was large enough to housed thousands of exhibits, roughly half representative of Britain and its colonies. Okay, so great exhibition, great exhibition of the power of Britain that you will see in this exhibition. Now, Charles Darwin, as I have told you, on Origin of Species, this actually will lead to the clash between science and religion. So, as this particular work, Darwin's work on the origin of his species, for the first time said that the idea of survival of the fittest, as well as how the human being evolved throughout the ages. I mean, he said that during the course of 10,000 or 15,000 years, human being evolved from being a monkey, a descendant of ape or monkey, to a human being. Okay, so we human being, I mean, we have considered ourselves as the child of God, made by God, created by God, and someone all of a sudden came up with this idea that no, our ancestors are actually those monkeys and apes. It's not that we have been thrown out to this world by God all of a sudden. So obviously there will be a clash between faith and science. People who were believing in God, they were thrashed by this idea that and this is what we will see in the poems of Matthew Arnold. He will always tell you about this religious clash because he was the disciple of religion. He was the pure supportive of religion. On the other hand, Tennyson was very much neutral. He was both taking the side of religion as well as science, but Arnold was completely, I mean, his ideas were opposed to science. So he said in the poem Dover Beach that the sea of faith was once full. He's actually referring to that time when these science and technology were not intervening in the religious matters. So he's saying the sea of faith was once full, but now it's retreating, which means we are losing our faith in God. We are giving primary, we are talking about science technology in a more diverse way, but we are on the other hand we are not talking about religion. Our religious sentiments are retreating day by day. Now, social Darwinism, based upon the idea, what Darwin said that all these species in this world, they follow this pattern of survival of the fittest. Only the ones who are with greater power to survive, they have the greater adaptation to their environment and to their surrounding. They can survive. Okay, all others will be eliminated. So the idea of Charles Darwin very influential in other fields besides biology. Okay, he has given this theory for biology, but then the social Darwinism led to the other ideas, okay, which somehow justified the imperialism and colonialism. Okay, I will tell you how. So the idea of Charles Darwin very influential in other fields besides biology, especially in those that sought to appropriate his theories of evolution for furthering these of progress and development. One such area is that of social science research. The theory of social Darwinism, closely associated with the idea of Herbert Spencer, was one such manifestation. As a term, social Darwinism refers to the attempt to use the ideas of evolutionary biology to explain social behavior. It is the theory that tries to argue that conflicts between persons, classes, countries, communities, or groups are necessary for the sake of progress and social growth. Okay, now social Darwinists believed that a stronger culture weeded out the weaker ones, and that was the base for colonialism as well as imperialism. Okay, they were saying that we are the strong culture, we can wipe out the weak one. Okay, we are the civilized one. We will civilize the uncivilized. Okay, so social Darwinists believe that a stronger culture weeded out the weaker ones in a manner that wasn't dissimilar to the theory of biological evolution propounded by Charles Darwin. The social Darwinists did not believe in the intervention of the state and considered social inequality to be reflective of a process that was akin to that of biological evolution. The twin concept of continuity and utility were part of the thesis of social Darwinism. The idea of social Darwinism were used by imperialists to justify the unequal relations between the colonizers and the colonized at the height of the empire. Okay, so this is the theory with which they have justified themselves. Now, if you remember in the first slide, I told you that there is a famous saying that the sun never sets on British Empire, and that actually because of the triumph of imperialism. Okay, in the early 18th century, the British had gained substantial control over territories in India. This was significant as just a few decades back, America had got independence, and so India constituted a major colony for the British. Within a very short time, the British dominated Indian culture, cultural and political life, and started influencing the course of social life. The process intensified when the only competition for the British in India, the French, gave up Madras, and Robert Clive's enterprising vision and tactics, therefore, was no looking back. Okay, so if you remember the Sepoy Mutiny that took place in 1857, then the rise of British Empire in India. Okay, the only competitor of the British were the French. They also left India. So the Battle of Plassey turned the tide in favor of the British, and when the Seven Years' War in Europe came to an end in 1763, it enabled them to consolidate their hold in India. The movement from colonization to imperialism was achieved in a number of ways, one of which related to the reduced powers of the East India Company and the growing governmental influence in administrative matters. Apart from India, other acquisitions of British in the 19th century included New Zealand and other islands in the Pacific, such as Tonga, Papua, and Fiji. The expansion of the British Empire also embraced parts of South Africa, where other European powers were vying for control as well. So, what happened next? Now, the late Victorian period. Okay, so you will find the questioning of authority that came into being during this late Victorian period, at the end of the late Victorian period, questioning of authority. Okay, the process of decolonization actually begins from this time because questioning of authority also includes the Sepoy Mutiny in India in 1857. For the first time, Indian rebels against this British Empire. Okay, now, even though they are suppressed, but that actually stirred the British Empire a lot. Even Ireland started to question the authority of British Empire. So many things happened. So questioning of the authority, the British regime, who were never questioned throughout the course of history, they are now questioned on every ground. Then science versus religion, about which I have already told you in the last slide. Poem of Arnold and Tennyson reflects this actually. The Crimean War and the First War of Indian Independence, the Sepoy Mutiny, were two significant events that marred the peace of the age. The Crimean War was fought between Russia and the allied force of Great Britain, France, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia. The allied forces wished to restrain the Russian expansion in the Black Sea region. The war came to an end with the Treaty of Paris in 1856. According to the treaty, Russia was forced to return the territories that it had occupied in the Ottoman Empire. Okay, although Russia was defeated, but then again the questioning of authority. Britain was questioned by Russia. Chinese officials seized 20,000 carats of opium from British merchants in Guangzhou. This led to the Opium War, in which Britain emerged victorious and forced China to sign the Treaty of Nanjing. Through this treaty, China had to give Hong Kong to Britain and was forced to open five of its ports to British trade and residents. Now, let us come to the Victorian literature. Okay, those were the historical events that actually paved the way for the modernism. Okay, the clash between religion and science, the questioning of the authority, the questioning of the supreme rule or government. Okay, some of the misdeeds, such as prostitution, child labor, which were questioned by the prose writers in his patient. So Victorian literature comprises um, majority of prose work. In the field of prose, we have the works of brilliant men like Thomas Carlyle, John Ruskin, Matthew Arnold, William Cobbett, and Walter Pater. Men like Carlyle were opposed to the spreading of scientific idea. Okay, Carlyle, like that of Arnold, were opposed to the spreading of the scientific ideas. He believed that only a return to Puritanism could restore discipline to the country. So if you remember, this Puritanism was very strict morally. So he's saying that only a return to Puritanism could restore the discipline to the country. Politically, also Carlyle believed in the concept of one great leader who could lead his countrymen with his wisdom and strength. Ruskin and Walter Pater wrote on art, among other subjects, and paved the way for the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood. Okay, pre-Raphaelite movement. I will talk about this pre-Raphaelite brotherhood. So this pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, which was initially started by Dante, D.G. Rossetti, C.G. Rossetti, William Holman Hunt, this actually said that we will look uh, as the role model to the painters who were before Raphael. That's why we call it pre-Raphaelite. They said that after Raphael, during and after Raphael, the painting was not so, um, beautiful, not so sensuous, not so like that of an art. Okay, but before Raphael, pre-Raphaelite poetry and paintings were actually very fascinating, very beautiful. Okay, so we will be following those painters instead of the Raphael and his disciples. So this was the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood started by C.G. and D.G. Rossetti, William Holman Hunt, and C.G. Rossetti. So, poetry blossoms in Victorian age. A new form of poetry called the dramatic monologue became very popular. And Robert Browning was very much, kind of father figure of dramatic monologue. Lord Alfred Tennyson was the most representative poet whose poetry reflected the varying nuances of Victorian life and character. Matthew Arnold wrote a great deal of poetry that had a tremendous impact upon the age. A separate group of poets called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood believed that art should exist for art's sake. Okay, so this very quotation, this very idea of art for art's sake came from this Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which has influenced this aestheticism and decadence, which follows this pre-Raphaelite brotherhood. They admired the Italian painter who lived before Raphael. The poets who belonged to this school were D.G. Rossetti, C.G. Rossetti, William Holman Hunt. Victorian literature includes some of the most popular novels ever written. Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, the Bronte sisters, George Eliot, George Meredith, and Thomas Hardy are some of the shining stars who belong to this galaxy. Their novels give us accurate pictures of the social life of this age, especially the novels of Dickens. Okay, he was the follower of realism. So he portrayed this child labor, the condition of the poor, and the condition of working men in the factories in his novels every now and then. Victorian writers wrote about the prosperity of the classes and the wretched condition of the poor. They reflected in turn Victorian optimism and pessimism. So that's it in Victorian. This was the session of Victorian history and literature. But then I have told you the important events that took place, especially those of social Darwinism, the rise of imperialism, science, technology, and innovation, and Oxford movement, Chartism, social unrest that were taking place at that time. So these all actually paved the way for the modernism, where you will see a very drastic change. Okay, even more than that of the Victorian age, completely shattering of dreams in the modern age. So I will be taking one lecture on modern age in the next class. Um, so till then, bye bye.